For years, she lived in silence, trapped behind a smile, hiding bruises and broken dreams. No one came. No one asked. But in the middle of all that pain, her horse, forgotten and feared by everyone else, was watching. And one night, when everything seemed lost, he did something no one expected. The farmhouse looked peaceful from a distance, white siding, a rusted windmill spinning slowly, and fields that stretched for miles. But behind the peeling paint and weathered fences, the truth was far from quiet. Laura Whitaker had moved there 5 years ago. Back then, she believed in promises. Jake was charming, hard-working, and said all the right things. He inherited the property from his father, and Laura saw it as a fresh start. Away from the city, away from the noise. But silence, she would learn, could be dangerous too. At first, it was subtle. Jake would get upset over small things, the way she folded laundry, how much salt she used. Then came the apologies, the flowers, the soft kisses on bruises he swore he didn't mean to leave. She wanted to believe him. She needed to, but the bruises grew darker. The excuses grew thinner. And soon, Laura wasn't allowed to leave the property without him. The car keys vanished. Her phone was accidentally broken. Groceries were delivered once a month, and conversations with neighbors became rare. Jake always had a reason. He never yelled in public, never hit her where it showed, but the walls of that house knew, and so did she. Each day was predictable. Coffee at 6, chores at 7, silence by 8, and fear. Always. Laura learned to read his footsteps, the way the screen door creaked when he came in angry. Some days she tried to fight back. Most days she just disappeared inside herself. The only time she felt like she could breathe was when she wandered out back, near the old barn where they kept Rufus. Jake had forgotten the horse was even there. Rufus was just one more thing he didn't care about anymore. But Rufus noticed her. Every time she passed, his ears perked, his gaze followed, like he knew, and maybe he did. If stories like this move you, don't miss the next one. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you're first to feel every heartbeat, every twist, every truth we uncover. These aren't just stories, they're second chances, and they're waiting for you. Join us before the next moment slips away. Rufus had once been the pride of the ranch, a black stallion with fire in his eyes and thunder in his stride. He was meant for rodeos, parades, the kind of attention Jake used to crave. But Rufus didn't break easily. He bucked off riders, resisted commands, and carried a stubborn streak no one could tame. Jake lost patience, said the horse was useless, dangerous. So Rufus was left to rot behind the barn, chained in a corral, barely big enough for a proper gallop. No saddle had touched his back in years, no brush had smoothed his coat, his hooves were overgrown. His water trough often sat empty for days. To anyone else, he was a waste of space, a relic of pride gone wrong. But to Laura he was something else entirely. The first time she wandered close, she expected him to turn away or lash out. But he didn't. He just watched her, quietly, intently, as if he recognized something in her eyes, a weight he carried too. His breath was heavy, his body scarred, yet there was something dignified in his stillness, a silent strength, and when the wind moved through his mane, it seemed almost like a whisper, like a promise unspoken. Jake never went near Rufus anymore. He'd forgotten the stallion existed, too wrapped up in control, rage, and his own emptiness. But Laura hadn't forgotten. She brought Rufus small things at first, half an apple, a slice of bread, a handful of hay she hid in her jacket. He never flinched, just stood there taking her in. Neither of them said a word, but they didn't have to, because some wounds are easier to understand in silence. It started with the smallest gestures, a quiet whistle from Laura as she walked to the barn. The way Rufus's ears would twitch when he heard her coming. She stopped being afraid of how close she could get. Day by day, inch by inch, the space between them shrank. She began brushing his tangled mane with her fingers, at first gently, almost afraid to touch him. But he didn't move. He just stood there, letting her be near. It was the first time in years she felt like someone trusted her. And maybe the first time she realized she could still trust something too. Laura started to talk to him. Nothing grand, just murmurs, half-formed thoughts, a sentence here and there. Sometimes she'd apologize for her silence. Other times she'd share memories. Her voice cracked more than once, but Rufus never looked away, never blinked. One afternoon, after a long rain, she found him lying down, covered in mud. Without thinking, she knelt beside him, resting her head against his side. His chest rose and fell slowly. She closed her eyes. It was the safest she had felt in years, and it wasn't just comfort, it was connection. Rufus didn't judge, didn't ask questions, didn't expect her to be someone she wasn't. He simply showed up every time she did. Sometimes Laura wondered if he remembered being powerful, if he missed running free. She'd picture him charging across fields, untethered, unstoppable. And in those moments she could almost believe that freedom was still possible, for both of them. Jake never noticed the change. He didn't care where she went, as long as dinner was on the table and no one asked questions. That suited Laura just fine, because what she was building with Rufus wasn't meant to be seen, not yet. It was something sacred, something that didn't need words to be real. Jake began to notice a shift, not in Laura's words, but in her presence. She moved differently, calmer somehow, less tense around him, and that, to a man like Jake, was unacceptable. Control wasn't something he was willing to lose. One night after dinner, he asked where she'd been all afternoon. His tone was casual, almost sweet, but Laura had lived this script before. The quiet voice before the storm. She said she'd been cleaning the pantry. His eyes narrowed, scanning her hands, rough with tiny scratches and a smear of hay stuck to her sleeve. He didn't say anything then, but the next day, he followed her. From the shadows of the house, he watched her walk toward the barn, a cloth bag slung over her shoulder. She stopped at Rufus's corral. The horse came to her immediately, lowering his head to meet her hands. Jake's jaw clenched. That night there was no warning, no words, just the sound of a plate crashing against the wall and his voice, a low, boiling growl. He accused her of feeding that worthless animal, said she cared more about a beast than her own husband. Laura didn't respond. That silence only fueled his rage. He grabbed her by the arm, dragging her toward the back porch. Her wrist twisted under his grip, her breath caught in her throat. From the pasture, Rufus stood motionless, ears pointed forward, body tense like a coiled spring. Laura's heart pounded. Something had shifted, not just in Jake, but in the air itself, and Rufus felt it. The storm came without warning. Clouds rolled over the hills like a tide of ash, and the wind began to howl through the broken slats of the barn. The sky cracked open with lightning, flashing like a shutter, revealing for just a second the chaos waiting to unfold. Inside the house, Laura tried to keep her voice steady. Jake's mood had darkened with the weather. He'd been pacing for hours, bottle in hand, muttering about betrayal, about her turning against him with a damn horse. She stayed quiet. It was safer that way, but silence wasn't protection that night. He lunged. Furniture scraped against the floor. A lamp shattered. Laura ran, breath ragged, stumbling onto the back porch. Rain soaked her hair as she slipped and caught herself on the railing. Behind her, the door slammed open again. Jake followed, eyes wild, the belt already in his hand. Laura screamed, not in fear but in fury. Her voice cracked through the storm like thunder. Across the field, Rufus heard. He didn't hesitate. Wood splintered as his massive frame slammed against the fence. Once, twice. Then, with a final crack, it gave way. Mud flew beneath his hooves as he bolted toward the house, mane whipping, muscles surging with a strength no one thought he still had. Jake didn't see him coming, but Laura did. Through the sheets of rain, through the blur of fear, she saw him, charging like a shadow made of fire and fury. Rufus closed the distance in seconds, eyes locked not on Laura, but on the man who had hurt her one time too many. And in that moment, something ancient stirred in the storm. Not vengeance, but protection. Jake turned just in time to see the massive stallion burst through the rain like a living bolt of lightning. "Get back!" he shouted, stumbling backward, belt still in hand. But Rufus didn't stop. His hooves pounded the earth, sending tremors through the porch as he lunged between Laura and the man who had tormented her for years. Rufus reared up, towering above Jake with a furious snort that cut through the storm. His eyes were wild, his breath heavy, and for a moment even Jake, drunk, angry, unmovable, froze. Then he made a mistake. He swung the belt. It barely grazed Rufus's shoulder, but it was enough. The horse roared, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to come from someplace older than rage. He surged forward, knocking Jake off balance. The man fell hard, his back hitting the wet ground with a thud that sucked the air from his lungs. Laura watched in shock as Rufus stood over Jake, chest heaving, not moving, not attacking, just standing there. Dominant, protective. Jake didn't dare get up. The belt slipped from his hand, sinking into the mud. Laura, still frozen on the porch, felt her legs give way as tears mixed with rain on her cheeks. Rufus turned his head slowly toward her, as if to ask, "Are you all right?" She nodded. Something inside her shifted. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid. The yard was still. Only the rain moved now, tapping gently on the tin roof, like a heartbeat slowing down. Jake remained on the ground, stunned, covered in mud, too shocked to speak. Rufus stayed above him, unmoving, his massive frame a silent warning. Inside the house, a phone rang. Mrs. Callahan, the elderly neighbor who hadn't seen Laura in days, had heard the scream over the storm. She didn't ask questions, just called the sheriff's office and gave them the address. Something was wrong. She could feel it. Minutes later, flashing lights painted the wet fields red and blue. Officer Daniels approached slowly, hand resting on his holster. He found Jake face down, grumbling curses. Laura stood nearby, trembling, her arm bruised and clothes soaked. Rufus, calm now, stepped back without resistance. Jake tried to speak, but Daniels had heard enough. He was cuffed without ceremony, placed in the back of the cruiser. Laura watched in silence, holding the railing for balance, as the car disappeared down the dirt road. She didn't say thank you. She just looked at Rufus, and for the first time he blinked. If this story has touched something in you so far, take a moment to like the video and share what you're feeling in the comments. Sometimes just putting it into words helps us see how deeply these moments connect us. You're not alone, and your voice matters here. The days that followed moved slowly, like thawing ice. Karen Myers, a soft-spoken social worker with kind eyes, met Laura the next morning. She listened more than she talked, didn't press, just made sure Laura had a warm coat, a hot meal, and a place to go. But Laura didn't leave right away. She stayed for Rufus. There was talk of taking him away. Some said he was aggressive, unpredictable, a risk. But word had already spread about the horse who stopped a man, about the woman who survived because of him. The story took root in the town, whispered in grocery stores, and passed around diner tables. Laura stood her ground. "He's not dangerous," she said. "He's the reason I'm still here." The town listened. 3 weeks later, with Jake facing charges and no longer a threat, Laura signed a lease on a small piece of land 2 towns over. Quiet, clean. Her name was finally on something that was hers. Rufus came with her. A new stall, fresh hay, a field big enough for him to run again. Laura watched as he stepped into the sun, shaking his mane like he was shedding more than just dirt. She renamed him that day, not for who he had been, but for what he had done. Hope. Some stories don't need words to be understood. Laura never told many people what happened that night, not in full, but she didn't have to. The way she walked now said enough. Shoulders relaxed, eyes steady, breath deep. She still visited Rufus, now Hope, every morning. She'd lean on the fence, coffee in hand, watching him graze under the early sun, and sometimes he'd come close, nuzzling her arm like he remembered everything. Because he did. He remembered the scream. He remembered the fear in her eyes. and he remembered that no one else came except him. They had both been discarded, left behind, but in each other they found something no one else had given them: loyalty, trust, a reason to stand. Some say animals act on instinct, but Laura believed it was something more. Hope didn't just save her life, he gave it back to her. And now, every time someone asks why she kept him, she simply smiles and says, "Because he saw me when no one else did." If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes that every soul, no matter how broken, has a purpose. And tell me in the comments, why do you think he did it?